Thijs, move it. Okay. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to Pakhuis de Zwijger. My name is Bart de Koning. I'm a journalist. I'm your moderator for tonight. Tonight we'll be talking about control over the drugs market. It's organized by the Law Enforcement Action Partnership. It's a very topical subject. It's very hot, every day in the news. I wanted to say that Donald Trump has destroyed 3 drugs boats, but then Diane told me it's already 4. Drugs traffickers are now called narco-terrorists, which seems to be a license to kill people. Dozens of people have been murdered without any evidence so far. On the other hand, in Amsterdam, we have a movement towards the legal distribution of perhaps crack to very heavy users to avoid harm to them and nuisance for citizens. So these are 2 different opposing directions. There's a ramped-up war on drugs on the one hand and a move towards legalization on the other hand. And the other issue that's very, very topical tonight will be the discussion, is this an international question? Should we regulate drugs on an international level or on a national level, or should perhaps the local government be more involved? These are the 2 themes. We have a very full program, so we'll get on with it right away. Our first speaker is Ruben Boomsma. He's the chair of LEAP Netherlands. He is a police officer, deputy superintendent, 20 years experience, and he's also a chair of the co-chair of the Dutch Society of Evidence-Based Policing and involved in the global societies of evidence-based policing, which is very important, of course, because we want facts and rationality in the drugs debate. Ruben, take it away.
Thank you very much. Good evening, first of all. It's an honor to be standing here before this room of different people from all kinds of organizations and all kinds of backgrounds. And this is a very relevant topic in our society, drugs. Drugs have been banned for over 100 years now, globally. And the war on drugs exists for over 50 years. And under Nixon, the president, it had even racist motivations. And what exactly has 100 years of prohibition and 50 years of war on drugs brought us? So there's been produced more cocaine than ever at the expense of the environment and climate. There are more drugs than ever. And drugs are relatively cheap, at least here in the Netherlands. So you can buy ecstasy pill for like €5, weed for €10, speed is also around €10. Cocaine is around the 50 euros, so it's more expensive. But the price of cocaine declined. So the price for a kilo cocaine in the Netherlands is now around €15,000, and it was last year 30,000. So are we effective? That's the question. Drugs are also widely available, despite prohibition. You can get it everywhere. Enforcement costs us as a society 3 to 4 billion euros annually. And if you look at the war on drugs that exists for over 50 years, it's 1 trillion, so 1,000 miljard in Dutch. And it costs extensive capacity of law enforcement. And I ask again, with what effect? So in Mexico alone, there was a war on cartels in 2006 initiated. 450,000 people died in drugs-related killings. 450,000 in almost 20 years. And if you look at the opiate overdoses in the US and also Canada, it takes up to almost 100,000 deaths every year. It's declining, so that's good news. And that epidemic started by legal big pharma. So we had a legal institution bringing opiates on the market with an epidemic as a follow-up. And at the same time, in the Netherlands, more than 100,000 people are using painkillers without description by a doctor. So also that's a pretty big market. And if you look at it in perspective, then alcohol causes the most overall harm of all drugs. You can buy it in every grocery in the Netherlands and in many other places. And if you rank addictive substances, then we start with heroin, then comes crack, and then tobacco, then methamphetamine, cocaine, followed by alcohol. And if you look at MDMA, there was a state commission here in the Netherlands. They stated that MDMA de facto is a soft drugs, but still exists on list 1, as seen as a hard drug. And at the same time, there are cutbacks on harm reduction. That's a way we really can help people. So a fast expanding illegal market, which is controlled by criminals who resort to violence to resolve conflicts, and regulation is absent. There's no adequate quality testing on the criminal market and no age limit. Making money is the primary motive, and in that way, even cartels can finance their own armies. Terrorist organizations like Al-Qaeda finance their terrorist attacks by drug selling. So is this the best way for dealing with drugs? At LEAP, we don't think so. And we're not alone. So the mayor of Amsterdam, Femke Halsema, and other mayors also think so. And so do various political parties, also international, even the president of Colombia. And many organizations and experts in the field of substances, addiction, and healthcare think alike. So at LEAP, we are connected to a global network of professionals who advocate for a different policy. There are, for example, compelling examples of new policies worldwide. Look at the regulation of cannabis in a growing number of countries. Where the Netherlands used to be a guiding country, we're now hopelessly behind. And when it comes to heroin regulation, we are ahead. Because heroin is de facto regulated through medical provision. It is therefore of great and even national importance that we discuss the effectiveness of our current drug policy based on knowledge and facts. And no, that's not just bar talk. The prohibition paradox helps us to discuss effective policy. And 3 years ago we did this in the OBA here nearby in Amsterdam, and 1.5 years we did it in a police venue, and now here in Pakhuis de Zwijger. So thank you very much for attending, and I wish you all a wonderful evening full of dialogue.
Thank you, Ruben. And our next speaker is Wayne Harris. He's the chair of LEAP in the USA. He's been a police officer for more than 30 years. And, well, I'll leave it to you.
Well, that's not fair. You just told half of my keynote speech. So, bear with me for one moment, please. So good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here with you. I appreciate the invitation. So I'm here tonight not just as a speaker, but as someone who spent years on the front lines of this fight. My name is Wayne Harris, and I've worked in the law enforcement industry for over 35 years, most recently in Rochester, New York, where I retired as a deputy chief of police. I've seen firsthand the devastation that drug markets bring to our communities. I've walked into homes where addiction has hollowed out hope. I've stood with families who've lost loved ones to overdoses. And I've arrested people who weren't hardened criminals. They were hurting, trapped, and often invisible to the systems meant to protect them. So when I talk about controlling drug markets, I'm not talking about theory. I'm talking about lived experience. And I'm here to tell you we cannot arrest our way out of this crisis. I began my career as an intern with the City of Rochester, serving as a liaison between the police department and the street gangs operating within its borders. From day one, I witnessed firsthand how drugs permeated every layer of the community, from the officers that were sworn to uphold the law, to the citizens caught in the orbit of illicit drug sales and use, and to the individuals actively engaged in the drug trade. It didn't take long to realize that our efforts to address drugs in the community were falling short, miserably short. The strategies we relied on weren't solving the problem. They were chasing symptoms, not causes. My internship ended when I entered the police academy in October of 1987, and I retired from uniformed service in December of 2017. Over those 30 years, I saw lives and neighborhoods devastated by the scourge of drugs. I learned quickly that substance use was a common thread in countless calls for service, whether directly or indirectly. Take prostitution, for example. In Rochester, the sex trade was deeply intertwined with addiction. The men and women involved weren't just selling their bodies, they were trying to survive, often driven by a need to feed their dependency. The same pattern held true for burglaries in my area of responsibility. Suspects were frequently stealing items that they could sell just to support their addiction. And that brings us to the dilemma. So much of what police respond to, so many of the crimes, the disturbances, the emergencies are rooted in addiction. And because of that, many have come to believe that policing is the only solution, but it's not. We fail to recognize drug addiction for what it truly is, a public health crisis. Until we treat it as such, we will continue to chase shadows while the real problem grows in plain sight. For decades, our approach to drug markets has been fragmented. Law enforcement on one side, public health on the other. But the truth is we're fighting the same war, just from different angles. And if we're serious about saving lives, reducing harm, and restoring communities, we must move from parallel efforts to a unified strategy. So let's be clear. Drug markets are not just criminal enterprises. They're public health emergencies. Every overdose, every addiction, every family torn apart is a reminder that enforcement alone is not enough. We must treat addiction not as a moral failure, but as a medical condition. And we must treat traffickers not just as lawbreakers, but as architects of suffering. So let me share two stories from my time in the field, stories that shape the way I see this crisis. The first involves a young man, we'll call him Marcus, who was arrested 3 times in 2 years for drug possession. Each time he was released, and each time he returned to the same corner, to the same friends, to the same circle that he had been with forever. And one day I sat down with him, not as a cop, but as a person. And I asked him what he needed. He didn't ask for a lawyer. He didn't ask for a second chance. He simply said, "I need help." That moment struck me, and it stuck with me. It reminded me that behind every statistic is a story. Behind every arrest is a human being. And behind every policy is a choice. Do we punish or do we heal? Early in my uniformed service, I encountered another young man. His name was Anthony. I had arrested Anthony multiple times for burglaries in my patrol area. He was 13 years old. He already had a drug problem that was costing him hundreds of dollars a day just to maintain. I reached out to his mother one day, hoping she might help intervene. Her response to me was heartbreaking. She refused to help me get Anthony off of drugs, explaining that the money Anthony brought home from the items that he had stolen and sold helped support their household. So that conversation revealed just how deep this crisis runs, not just in individuals, but in families. Addiction doesn't just destroy lives, it distorts values. It reshapes priorities and erodes the very foundation of community. These stories aren't outliers. They're reflections of a system that has been overwhelmed, and they underscore a painful truth. Law enforcement alone cannot fix what is fundamentally a public health emergency. In Kentucky, Attorney General Russell Coleman recently emphasized this very point at the RX and Illicit Drug Summit. He spoke of a multifaceted approach, one that includes law enforcement treatment programs and youth education. That's the kind of leadership we need here. Not reactive, but proactive. Not punitive, but restorative. So what does a uniform strategy look like? There are a couple of different components. One is smart enforcement. We must be strategic. Focus on high-level traffickers, not low-level users. Use intelligence-led policing to dismantle networks, not neighborhoods. Invest in technology, data sharing, and interagency cooperation and collaboration. And train officers not just in tactics, but in trauma-informed care. Another component in the strategy would be public health integration. We need to expand access to treatment, harm reduction services, and mental health care. Naloxone should be as common as handcuffs. Syringe exchange programs, safe consumption sites, and medication-assisted treatment aren't signs of surrender. They're signs of compassion, and they work. Education and prevention. We should start early. We should teach resilience, not resistance. Equip our youth with tools to navigate risk, not just avoid it. We should partner with schools, faith communities, and youth organizations. Prevention is not a billboard, it's a relationship. And then finally, community collaboration. We must rebuild trust, involve families, educators, local leaders. Listen to the voices of those most effective, because without trust, there is no progress. And without community, there is no healing. We cannot talk about the intersection of law enforcement and public health without acknowledging the tragedy of a gentleman by the name of Daniel Prude. In March of 2020, department that I came from, the Rochester Police Department, responded to a call about a man in mental health distress, and as it turns out, PCP intoxication. He was naked in the street, clearly in crisis. And by the way, the weather in Rochester is very similar to here in Amsterdam. It was March in the middle of the night, and it was snowing. What followed was not a moment of care. It was a moment of control. Officers restrained him, placed a spit hood over his head, held him down. There were about 3 or 4 officers. One held his head down, one held his chest down, while the other one controlled his legs. A week later, Daniel Prude was dead, and his death was ruled a homicide at the hands of the police. His death wasn't just a failure of policing, it was a failure of imagination, a failure to see a man in distress as someone who needed help, not force. And it exposed a painful truth. Our systems are not equipped to respond to mental health crisis or substance use crisis with compassion, dignity, and medical care. In the wake of his death, Rochester saw protests similar to George Floyd, outrage, calls for reform, but it also saw something else. It saw action. The community came together to launch something called Hope First Rock, a peer-led, non-police crisis response program designed to offer trauma-informed support during moments of crisis. It's a model inspired by programs like Denver's STAR Initiative, and it's a step towards reimagining what safety can look like. Tragic incidents like those involving Daniel Prude and George Floyd became catalysts for change, prompting initiatives such as LEAP's Community Responder Program, where public safety is reimagined through non-uniformed community and expert-based solutions. Daniel Prude's story is not an isolated incident. It's a mirror. And if we're willing to look into it, we'll see the consequences of treating public health emergencies as criminal matters. We'll see the cost of failing to equip officers with the training, tools, and alternatives they need. And we'll see the opportunity to do better. We owe it to Daniel Prude and to every person like him to build a system that responds to crisis with care, not cuffs. That's the future we must fight for. That's the future we must fund, and that's the future we must lead. And by the way, as we're considering funding it, for any community leaders or elected officials, please figure out a way to make the funding permanent so that it can't be taken away sometime in the future. This is not about choosing sides. It's about choosing solutions. It's about recognizing that the badge and the stethoscope are not symbols of separate worlds, but instruments of the same cause. Now, I know this work isn't easy. It requires humility. It requires courage. And it requires a willingness to challenge the status quo. But I believe we're ready, and I believe we're capable. And I believe we're called to do more than just contain the crisis. We're called to transform it. So let me leave you with this, please. The measure of our success will not be in arrests made or policies passed. It will be in lives reclaimed, in overdoses prevented, in futures restored. So let's commit, not just to controlling drug markets, but to reimagining the systems that allow them to thrive. Let's build a response that is as complex, resilient, and human as the challenge itself. So thank you very, very much. Let's get to work.
Very much. Beautiful story. Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Peter Muyshondt, the Chief of Police in Rupel. It's near Antwerp in Belgium. And he has a very personal story as well. His brother Tom died, lost in the marginalization that drugs consumption can cause. That's a very touching sentence. Peter wrote 2 books about it. Broers waren we were brothers. And another book, Beleid op speed, Policy on Speed, about the failure of the drugs policy. And he is a rare voice in this debate because he's one of the very few senior officers, active senior officers, who speak about a drug policy change. Peter, thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. Is this working? Yes. I've seen some much more qualified speakers in the room, so I'm a bit stressed now, especially because it's in English. Thank you for having me. As Bart told you, my brother died in 2006. I'm not going to pull the emotional card. I've done that before. But it made some things moving in my head because I was trained as a military police officer. Because in the beginning of my career I was part of the military, then I skipped the details of this reorganization, but I was a military trained to fight the war on drugs, and I did do the war on drugs. I'm still doing it. I'm still waging this war on drugs on a daily basis. But after my brother died, I started looking into, or I started questioning what I was doing, what we were doing. Now, is this the right approach? Because my brother died and I was still convinced that having something punitive behind the door that might help him finally to get clean and to stay sober. Was I wrong? So at a certain moment I started vetting the internet. I came across the website of Transform Drug Policy Foundation and they recruited me. Yes, they actually recruited me because they asked me to speak at the launch of LEAP UK, which was in 2016, I think. For the first time, I spoke in public in the British Parliament, sitting aside Neil Franklin. I think Diane was there too. Who was there as well? Johan Harry, best-selling author of Chasing the Scream. Quite an impressive audience, and I was there for the first time speaking in public about drug reform and drug policy. And after that session in the UK Parliament, they asked me to join them to UNGAS in New York. What was my first public speaking, where there was also a Belgian audience from the Justice Department, and then my problems started. No, that's a joke, because in all honesty, I didn't have much problems by speaking out as a police officer, serving police officer, at least in Belgium. So if there's police officers in this room or anybody involved in the justice line, don't feel too afraid to speak out, because in this part of the world, it is pretty okay to speak out. We have this freedom of speech, which is very important. Not everywhere in the world, I can assure you that, but in this part of Europe, we can speak out. So when I was in New York, I was invited at the ambassador's office. They thought I was being the representative of the official point of view. So if you have ever been at the dinner of a diplomat, there is a protocol to follow. The first round is you can present yourself. Who are you? Well, I'm the chief superintendent of Belgian police, blah, blah, blah. Second round is, what are you standing for? So I was sitting next to all officials from the Justice Department, Federal Police, and so forth. They all say prohibition, prohibition, prohibition. And then it was my turn. I said, listen, I'm for legal regulation of everything. And then everybody started looking at me like, who the hell is this guy? I was never invited again at those dinners. But I haven't changed my mind since then, because I was really convinced by the model that Transform Drug Policy Foundation has developed, not only Transform, but all those actors involved in, and I'm a firm believer of that model. But in 2019, I was appointed as the chief of police, and this is where the tricky part comes. When you're representing an organization, and I'm also responsible for policing Tomorrowland Festival. I assume you know the Tomorrowland Festival. We have a lot of drugs. We have every year we have casualties, people dying from irresponsible drug use. It is very difficult to me as chief of police representing policing Tomorrowland to stand up against official policy, also in respect of my people who have to do their job. So I made a commitment to not speak in public anymore as long as I'm chief of police in Belgium. But for tonight, I'm making an exception for you. No, don't applaud yet. Wait until my keynote is over. One of the things I learned during the years of advocacy I have been doing is that you shouldn't waste your energy on crowds that are only listening to you just to make their prohibitionist narrative more stronger. But if you can find common grounds, even with people who do not agree with your point of view, then it is worth the effort. But before I continue, let me give you some facts and figures, not too much. But when I wrote my second book, I was making reference to the United Nations World Drug Reports. They make it every year. I'm one of those few people who actually read those reports, or definitely the management summary, because it's quite an impressive work. But the figures I used for my second book were figures from 2015. 250 million people used illicit drugs at that time, of whom approximately 30 million people suffered from drug use disorder. For this evening, I checked the latest drug reports, the figures of 2023, because this report is 2025, but refers to figures of 2023. 316 million people have been using illicit drugs, of whom 64 million have suffered drug use disorder. That is, if I calculate right, an increase of 26% in 8 years of people who have used drugs. and an increase of 160% of people suffering from drug use disorder. So if a CEO comes to his management board, present these results, presenting or pretending that this policy has been put in place to ensure and protect public health, he or she would be fired instantly. But we all know that this drug policy is not about public health, it is a political tool. So the topic of this evening is clear. Do criminal organizations rule the market? Of course they do. Imagine that authorities would control an illegal market, then that would make them criminals as well. So legally regulating drugs establishes formal controls over their production, availability and use. This includes controls on price, taxation, marketing, quality and implementing age restrictions. Each drug will be and can be regulated based on an assessment of the risks if it presents with different levels of restriction ranging from very lightly regulated sales in shops to supply by prescription only. None of these regulatory controls are possible while drugs remain in the illegal market. So that is the response to your question. I learned from Bart that we are targeting dialogue as well, so I will skip some part of my presentation because it will take us too far. Over the past decades, prohibition has been primarily a political-driven policy. As I told you, this politicization has skewed drug research towards demonstration of drug harms to justify punitive responses to the drug threat, if it is a threat. The actual outcomes of and alternatives to prohibition have not been meaningfully scrutinized. That is one of my reproaches I make to politicians. They don't do the efforts. They just close the door once you start talking about other policies, then they close the door. The modifications of drug policy discussed here should be accompanied by a similar modification of drug research. In particular, options and outcomes relating to policies intended to mitigate drug harms should be carefully explored. Research that allows legislative bodies at every level, internationally, national and local, to every level that to learn from and share specific constructive lessons from our existing experience of prohibition should also be put in place. Now let me go through some reactions that you will get once you step on the stage and you start debating other drug policies. One of them would be, if you are advocating for legal regulation, that would mean a drug-free for all society. Of course, that is not true. Although the legal regulation of drugs is sometimes characterized as a liberalization or a relaxation of the law, it is in fact completely the opposite. Because at that time you are bringing the drug trade within the law, and now it is outside the law. You bring it within the law so that strict controls can be applied. Such controls are impossible to impose under prohibition. Legal regulation enables responsible governments to control which drugs can be sold, who has access to them, and where they can be sold. Under prohibition, it is the criminal world who will decide where or make those decisions. It is a caricature, is that a correct pronunciation? Caricature? Caricature, in Dutch. Of the reform position to say that advocates of legal regulation want drugs to be freely available, like then you can sell it and buy it in the supermarket. I've heard this argument so many times. It is irresponsible in the extreme that alcohol and tobacco are already sold in this way. We should aim for better, stricter regulation of both legal and currently illegal drugs. Legal regulation is not a silver bullet of the problems caused by drugs, because that is one of those other arguments. Do you really think that legal regulation will solve everything? No, we don't think that legal regulation will solve everything. No one is claiming that legal regulation is a silver bullet for all the problems associated with drugs. The argument is that it can reduce, often dramatically, many of the disastrous problems caused by drug prohibition. Without criminalization as a deterrent, I was also convinced of this one, without criminalization to act as a deterrent, drug use will dramatically increase. That theory that criminalization has a significant deterrent effect which underpins the policy of prohibition is not supported by evidence. In all honesty, I think that once you would evolve towards legal regulation, that increase of some drugs, the use of some drugs will increase. Because right now it is prohibited. A large amount of our population will not use it because of the threat of punitive response. So I think it is imaginable that some people will try those drugs. But it is completely irrational to think that those people will stay and continue using those drugs. I always make the comparison with liquor in the supermarkets. In this logic, everybody would go to the supermarket buying their vegetables and compulsory buy liquor in the supermarket. That doesn't make any sense. By the contrary, in many countries, tobacco use is half what it was 30 years ago, and this reduction has been achieved without blanket bans or criminalizing smokers. It is a result of health education and stricter market regulation, only possible because tobacco is still a legal product. Another one often used is our young people, the protection of young people. Legal regulation will make every young people addicted to drugs. Prohibition has proven highly ineffective at restricting young people's access to drugs. Effective legal regulation, which includes or might include age restrictions, can limit young people's access to drugs, and we should obviously do all we can to prevent young people to taking drugs. But if they are using drugs, then I think as a parent, it is better that they use drugs that are controlled and not adulterated by criminal organization, by whatever substance nobody knows. Taking the drug trade away from criminal groups won't cause them to disappear. Also another one. Of course, they will not. This concern implies that we should maintain drug prohibition to keep criminals occupied with drug-related crime. Following this logic, we would not attempt to prevent any crimes in case people went on to commit other offenses instead. But it is an argument you will have to face if you stand up in the public debate. Legal regulation means being soft on crime. Now that's a good one. I'm from Belgium. There are shootings in Brussels every day now. So now some politicians are calling up to put the military in Brussels. We have that. We had that same situation in Antwerp, but now they are going to patrol in Brussels as well. Legal regulation is tough on crime. The people who most strongly oppose it are the criminals who make fast profits as a result of prohibition. If you really have balls, then you take over the markets and sell your own product, but controlled and in a proper way, licensed and so forth. What else will there be when you start debating? Drugs are dangerous. That's why they are illegal. Of course, we should regulate drugs precisely because they are dangerous, not because they are safe. Regulation is all about pragmatic management and reduction of risks. While it is clearly true that all drug use, both illegal and legal, carries risk, these risks are dramatically increased when drugs are produced and supplied by criminal profiteers. Prohibition maximizes the health risks associated with all drug use. It pushes the market towards riskier, more potent, and therefore more profitable products like crack cocaine, leads to the use of contaminated drugs of unknown strength, encourages high-risk using behaviors, pushes consumption into unsafe environments, and forces people who use drugs to come into contact with potentially violent criminal underworld. It is wrong to take drugs, so it would be wrong to encourage their use by legalizing them. I think that is one of those political arguments often used. Supporting legal regulation is not the same as endorsing drug use or somehow being pro-drugs. I'm completely anti-drugs because it killed my brother, and also drug policy killed my brother, but you can imagine that I'm not so really a fan of drugs. But civilized and tolerant societies should not use criminal sanctions to impose their moral judgments on adults whose actions do not negatively impact on others. Putting in place a drug policy that is healthy, just and humane is the most moral response to drug use, and that means legal regulation. People shouldn't buy drugs that are known to come from a violent and destructive criminal market. I think that comes from Holland, the yoga snuivers. That's an expression, and the Belgian politicians have used that argument now as well. So we should target people who buy drugs. People shouldn't buy consumer products that are produced or sold in ways that cause significant harm. But given that people will continue to buy drugs, as long as they are human beings, there will be a consumption of drugs. The only way to eliminate this harm is by ending prohibition and having governments legally regulate their production and sale. I'm coming almost to an end, so please stay only calm for 5 minutes more. The drug war can be won if we fight it harder. Of course, if we put the military in the street, we will win by investing greater resources in imposing harsher criminal penalties. The criminal justice-led approach to drugs is already imposing disproportionately harsh sentences and filling prisons with users and non-violent drug offenders. Doing more of the same will not produce different results. But, of course, this narrative allows politicians to be seen to be doing something. They're tough on crime. They can show their election public that they do not back away from criminals and so forth. You know this narrative. Now, I'm closing my keynote, but in February, the movie of my first book will be released. I was not a fan of filming my story, but apparently intellectual rights are not so properly protected in Belgium. I could go into debate and go to a court, but then I would probably lose the case and pay a lot of money to my lawyers. So my book will be filmed. Is filmed and will be released. So I actually saw it. So we made a settlement, an agreement, and now I'm training a bit for being back in public when it's released. It's beyond my will, but I will get some media attention again once this movie is in the cinemas. So this is a kind of a practice. I'm waiting for your feedback afterwards, how I did it. But this is important for LEAP. Everybody still working in the field, representing government institution. I'm still active. I can actually talk about experiences I had from within. Speaking out is not so easy. Not because you get retaliations from the inside. No, I must be very honest. I had a few incidents, but in general, that's pretty much okay. But it is about the position of police in society, in a democratic society. If you express yourself being law enforcement against or in favor of, specifically in topics like drug policy, you're choosing political sides. And being police, we have to be neutral, objective. And that is a very difficult exercise to do all the time. So I really understand why law enforcement is reluctant to speak out, because I know many of you share the same ideas. I had the benefits of having a brother killed, brother dead, so he's emotional. Let him speak. If you don't have somebody deceased, it becomes a bit more difficult. Anyway, if law enforcement is called to act as an expert, which we often do, we are involved in every working group. Before there's a law made, there is some working group and law enforcement is always represented. Then be at least as honest as you can and go further than only enlisting the numbers of arrests or seizures, stressing the different ways that drugs are smuggled, or telling that adulteration has been found in this or this. Because that's all the consequence of prohibition. Also be so honest to tell the good things of harm reduction strategies, what the effects are on the neighborhood of the installation of a drug consumption room, the positive effects of drug-assisted treatment facilities for helping repeated offenders dealing with addictions. Having a critical voice on the right time, not putting your authorities in a difficult position, that's a good advice I can give you. Do not make your authorities being in a difficult position that their police is fighting their point of view. So be vigilant when you take a stand. Having well-documented files and cases, support your narrative with official data. Because you have a lot of things, interesting things to tell, use that credibility cautiously. Law enforcement agencies have a lot to contribute, but be vigilant and intellectually honest. I quote Noam Chomsky, and then I'm I'm really closing my keynote, in the common good. The smart way to have people following passively and obediently is by limiting the spectrum of acceptable opinions, but allow a vivid discussion between those limits. Once you go outside those boundaries, a police officer telling that prohibition doesn't work and we should go for legal regulation, then you're cast away as irrational, too emotional, lost somewhere on the road. I call upon, are there any politicians in this room? You can be honest, we will not. If there were politicians in the room, I would only ask them to look at other policies instead of closing every single door that goes outside prohibition. I thank you for your attention, and I'm feeling the pressure from the moderator to leave.
Thank you very much. Our next speaker is Carla Gonzalez. She is a strategic policy advisor at the Public Order and Safety Department of the City of Amsterdam. And she works on the implementation of the Urban Agenda Dealing with Drugs, a policy program initiated by our mayor, Femke Halsema. You have the clicker?
I have the clicker, okay. Yes. So good evening, everyone. My name is Carla Gonzalez. I'm a strategic advisor to the mayor, working for the Department of Public Order and Safety at the Department of, the team of subversive crime. And I want to start my presentation with the after-movie of our conference that was held last year. It was the mayor's conference called Dealing with Drugs, the Quest for Legal Regulation. Nog een keer?
Legal regulation is the only solution to the growing power of organised crime.
The goal should be to take control.
We want a regulated market, not an uncontrolled market.
We can't go on the way we did for the last 50 years. Olivier is Commissioner for the Southeast.
Good morning. A very warm welcome to you to Dealing with Drugs, the Quest for Legal Regulation.
We've witnessed more than half a century of a global war on drugs, and it hasn't yielded the desired results, which is to eradicate the global drug trade.
Isn't the definition of insanity to do the same thing over and over again and expect different results? What we can see worldwide, in Europe and in the Netherlands, there's more violence. There are more drugs on the market. Our economy is getting infected. Our justice system is overloaded. So we need a change. We can't go on the way we did for the last 50 years.
One thing became clear to me is that no matter the size of the police operation, the number of police involved, the size of the market is never reduced. It remains the same. Has any policing activity actually made our communities safer? Reduced crime? It hasn't.
Organised crime has grown as a result of drug prohibition. It makes it more ruthless, more effective, and much more powerful. The only solution is to take legal control of the drug market.
The purpose of the conference is forming an international coalition of the willing, of people who want to collect facts, collect alternative solutions, where not repression is the central focus point, but public health, protecting our citizens, protecting our youngsters, protecting people who use drugs.
We have problems in public space, we have crime in public space due to that war on drugs. The nations will never act because they are not confronted with the problems. The problems is on the ground, is on the field, is in the cities, we see it in public space. That's why we have to act.
We are all concerned with the violence, the corruption, the health issues. So I'm glad we're having this conference and putting this debate into a more open and honest discussion. To take this topic away from taboo, from misinformation and from fear.
What I'd like to do is just give an overview of the kind of conceptual thinking around regulation of drugs and then a kind of brief overview of what the regulation of cocaine might look like.
Als genotsmiddelen worden gebruikt, dan moet je het goed organiseren. Want als jij het niet goed organiseert, dan laat je het eigenlijk over aan de criminele markt. En dan hebben we de afgelopen 50 jaar gezien wat het leidt in Nederland en daar zijn we niet blij van geworden. Wat heel erg goed is dat we het debat voeren. En hopelijk levert deze conferentie met alle voorbeelden ook uit het buitenland daar een belangrijke bijdrage aan.
The Ecstasy Shop is an art installation done by Poppy, a drug museum in the making. And we want to generate that debate about if we would regulate ecstasy, what would the conditions of sales be? Like marketing, like how many pills can you buy? And that's something that we want to engage the general public with. So that's why we're also here at the conference with our Ecstasy Shop.
It's a really groundbreaking and historical event. I don't think we've ever seen a discussion at this level. And yeah, this is not a conversation about whether we move towards legal regulation. It's not a conversation about if we should do it. It's really a conversation about how we do it and what the next steps should be. And I think that's really incredible.
And you can spread the words to everybody. Everybody can sign. It's not that it is just a small group. We have to collect power. I hope it is the beginning of humane, civilized and effective drugs policies. Thank you very much.
So the main question of the conference was, as you heard, it was the how. How do we regulate markets? And that was very important for the mayor, because if we started with the if question, it's already a moral discussion, and it's a discussion with a lot of emotions in it. So with the time that I've left, I want to take you through an overview of what problems we face in Amsterdam, but also the opportunities that we see in our battle against drugs. Okay, so the reality. Rotterdam is our main entry point for the cocaine, for the European cocaine market. The first half of this year, 60,000 kilograms of drugs was seized in the port of Rotterdam. And last year it was almost 26,000. And the year before, 2023, it was 45,000 kilos. So that sounds a lot that's being seized, but we believe that's only a fraction of what is really going through to the European cocaine market. So what's the role that Amsterdam plays in all of this? It's that Amsterdam is our financial hub. It's the financial district of the Netherlands. We have, in Amsterdam, we have a strong financial and trade sector that's very attractive for underground banking and for money laundering. But we also have a very vibrant nightlife. We have lots of tourism. We have the logistics. We have the airport nearby, but we also have our own harbor. And we have very good infrastructure. Amsterdam also houses criminal networks. So the consequences of these are that we've seen daytime shootings, we've seen the killings, the intimidation. Recently we've had some corruption cases within the municipality, and we've seen just a lot of money laundering. So why do cities matter in the battle against drugs? Well, we have the police fighting crime, we have the national government making laws, but also investing millions of euros for organized and subversive crime. But cities have a responsibility when it comes to health and when it comes to safety. We have, for example, for the health side, we have the information that the municipality gives on drugs and on drug use, but also the test service, the drug testing services. And for safety, our mayor, that's the mayor's competence, is to look out for the public order and safety of the city. Secondly, we have the administrative approach. We have the Bebop Act, where the mayor can revoke or deny the permits of bars, restaurants, real estate transactions. Let me check my notes. Yes, and the mayor can also close premises where there are cocaine labs being held or marijuana is being grown. She can close those premises. And also, very recently, we've been asking for full financial transparency when people, entrepreneurs, want to do business with a municipality. So in the recent years, we started focusing more on our parallel economies. What do we mean by this? Is that alongside the legal economy, there's a shadow economy where criminal money circulates through shops, through bars, through real estate and underground banking. So at the surface, it looks normal, but it's fueled with criminal and drug profits. We have in-house financial expert where we try to follow the money and give this information to our most relevant partners. So municipalities are also very important when it comes to youth and prevention because we invest in lots of prevention programs. We have, for example, a program that's called Safe Alternative. That's for youngsters between 12 and the ages of 12 and 24 with a minimum of 2 arrests. And every year we have around 250 youngsters who return from detention. So the program Detention and Return helps them to not fall into criminality again. And also maybe the most famous one is our Top 600 program, where there are the 600 most active perpetrators of crime, such as robberies, burglaries, assault and drug-related crime, all with the object to invest in their education, invest in their job perspectives, but also bring perspective into their own lives and bring safety to our neighborhoods. Because we, within the municipality, we truly believe that prevention is the core element of crime control. So cities also matter when it comes to innovation, because it's often that cities are a breeding ground for experiments that later become policy. A good example, and it's already mentioned by Ruben in the beginning, was the methadone provision. We had a heroin crisis in the 1980s, where it was visible when we started doing the methadone provision that the nuisance dropped, the risk of overdoses dropped, the users were in sight and they were being monitored. So last week in the newspaper there was this article about a crack cocaine experiment. The city is funding a preliminary research on the medical provision of crack cocaine for a specific, a very small marginalized group. This group is often homeless, they have debts, and they do crime. So if the results are positive, perhaps if everything goes well, we could provide medical crack for this vulnerable group at the beginning of 2027. An also thing that's innovative is that we're working on an MDMA blueprint. We have in our local coalition agreement that we would like to do a pilot for, a pilot with regulated MDMA. So we've been working on this MDMA blueprint, and we hope to have it finished by, this fall. So we're in this blueprint, we have thought out the entire process from production, distribution, and also consumption. Another thing that it's innovative, as you saw in our after movie, is that the fact that our mayor, who's a presiding mayor, she's not retired yet, she's signed on for another 6 years, she's willing to make this discussion and not wait until she's retired or not more in office. So And the main issue is that when you regulate, you take away the power from the criminals. So looking ahead, and also the question of this conference, like who's in charge, from our perspective, the municipality's perspective, is that the answer must be very clear, because it cannot be the dealers and it can also not be the criminal networks. But it also cannot be one actor alone, not the police, not the municipality, and certainly not the health services. Real control comes when we combine forces, combine enforcement, prevention, and innovation. So when policymakers, police, and health and cities use a different tool as one. That's how we take back control over the drug markets, and that's why cities matter in the fight. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Before I ask the panel to step forward, we have a few questions for the audience. And you see two papers, a blue and a yellow one, on your chair, that they were on your chair. And our first question to the audience is, who should have the most influence on drug policy? Now, if you want the local governments, you put up the yellow sign. If you want the international, you do the blue. So it looks pretty yellow. Yeah, it's overwhelmingly yellow. Oh, both. Okay, that's interesting. That's interesting. That's a good start. And our next question is, the highest priority in drugs policy should be public health or safety and crime prevention? Also a yellow one. And there is a fan of Ukraine in the back who has both blue and... Okay. Oh, that's interesting. Well, Has can work this out for further discussions later on. Then I would like to invite our panel to the front. Our first member is Diane Goldstein. She's a retired police officer. She began her career in 1983 in the Redondo Beach Police Department. She's the executive director of LEAP. She has years and years of experience fighting drugs, of course, and she's a very vocal voice in this debate. Our second speaker is Pieter Wallinga from the... Oh. Oh, Carla's... Oh, I thought you would do... Okay. Carla, well, you already introduced yourself. And then we have, of course, the omnipresent Has Cornelissen, who has been an international drug activist for more than 25 years. Well, he has a very impressive CV, but he is all over the place. And if I want to know anything about drugs, I call Has, and he knows it, and he knows everybody. So he's an advisor to LEAP, and I would like to start our panel discussion right here.
Thank you.
The first part is within the panel, and then afterwards, after maybe 20 minutes or so, the audience can join in if you have some questions.
Peter.
And Peter, of course. Oh my God. No, I didn't forget. I had the wrong card here. Of course. So, well, my first question would be, it's a very mixed picture. Some things are going very wrong in the United States. Some things seems to be going in the right direction here in Holland. Diane, can I ask you to reflect first on the situation right now?
Sure. So, because I'm old and my policing started 1983 and I retired in 2004, I think the significant concerns relative to the United States right now is we have had the golden age of reform in many aspects of 15 years of significant progress where we centered, for the most part, not always, that the sanctity of life is exactly what the most important thing should be when we design any drug control strategy, but really from a law enforcement perspective, it should be every policy that law enforcement touches. he who shall not be named, because I'm trying to keep this non-political at this point, is significantly pushing our policies back to the height of the drug war, which I participated in. And like Peter, I share some commonalities. Unfortunately, my brother died from a polydrug overdose in 2007. And what I saw in my policing career, because I was operational, I ran a surveillance team, I did joint terrorism task force surveillance, I did crisis management, is that I saw both the personal and the professional experience relative to the failures of the system, which law enforcement sometimes doesn't have the ability to change in a way that is meaningful in ordinary people's lives and in making ordinary people's lives better. And for me, that the most troubling thing right now is we are moving back to that failed, tough-on crime, drug war, where we believe, not we personally, right, but that our administration believes that the heavy hand of government, up to and including extrajudicial executions that are occurring in the name of the United States right now, is incredibly problematic. And without law enforcement, prosecutors, and we have some courageous leaders in the United States right now who are in fact speaking out, is our organization exists to provide a safety net for our legislators and our policymakers to be able to courageously dissent on a number of issues. And so I see clear attacks not just on democracy globally from the United States in some aspects, but for our citizens and undocumented people in our country are at great risk and are at great danger. And whatever legitimacy that law enforcement has gained in the last 15 years that I've been doing this advocacy work, it's going to take us decades, I mean decades, generational decades, for our communities to trust us because they can't see the difference between a local or a state law enforcement officer and the federal government right now who has adopted that it's okay for them to be masked and violate anybody's constitutional rights in the guise of throwing immigrants out of our country. So I think that's my concern, is that how are we going to save the reforms that we had, the progress that we had made that has been innovative, forward-facing, where we recognize that public health should be at the forefront of everything that we do. And so we need legislators, we need ordinary citizens, we need international communities, as I see here, to help us to continue to push that message.
Thank you. And Carla, how is the policy of Amsterdam shaping up in this international environment? There's a lot of wind blowing in your face, I suppose?
Yes, but we've been working very hard with our Coalition of the Willing because it's important to look for the people who are with you and then make a greater block, let's say, for, to make the case for regulation. We've been very successful in our coalition. We've had very much positive support, not only from the civil society, for example, who have adopted also our manifesto, but also local cities like Bern, like Zurich, Peter, help me, Brussels, yeah. So we've, slowly but very steady, we've been growing our coalition to make a plea for the regulation case.
Okay, and even Brussels, because I heard Peter tell that they're trying to put the army or the paratroopers on the street in Belgium. So how does that fit in this picture?
Well, Brussels, in fact, 19 communities, and we don't even have a government. We are a small country, but we have 7 governments, by the way. And in Brussels, they don't succeed to form a government after more than a year after the elections. So I think in Brussels there are some very progressive mayors in charge, but the federal government is right-wing. So we still have a national drug law. Even our Minister of Justice, who happens to be a Christian Democrat, says that we should now also focus on people using drugs. So we are moving towards the right, and there are still some islands in Belgium where there is a progressive policy. We have a drug consumption room in Brussels, which is illegal according to Belgian law. But when you have this narrative that public health is more important then you can have it under an academic project and shit like that. So there is some progressivity in Belgium, but our national government is moving to the right.
Mm-hmm. And Hans, how do you see this local and international development contrasting?
Yes, it's quite difficult because the drug treaties from the United Nations are the oldest global treaties that we have. So they influenced all drug policies on national, European, and local scale, and even in families, personal scale. So in order to really change drug policy, basically you have to go back to the beginning, which is the international drug treaties, the opium laws, 1918 in The Hague, the treaties. There you should go back to. But I fully agree with the audience and with Carla and a lot of other people. Start locally, start experiments. They see they're on the ground with their feet in the mud. Work it out there, experiment, and make the best practices. Use that in other places.
And then hopefully it trickles up or something like that, or?
Grassroots, we call that, yeah.
Grassroots, okay. But we have to wait another few years for the United States then before.
Well, I do want to say there's more than one positive thing, but it's really interesting on the work that's going on in psychedelic and officer health and wellness in particular in the United States. We've seen some tremendous movements because there have been unlikely bedfellows and coalitions that have evolved. As a matter of fact, out of Texas we had former Governor Rick Perry, who is a Republican, who is spearheading research into psychedelics, ibogaine in particular, and we're seeing a weird left-right coalition building up on the use of psychedelics, which is being spearheaded by veterans as the tip of the spear, and then first responders coming in behind it. And so I was slightly amused by the ecstasy machine out there, because I always jokingly referred the DEA as the no-fun police. In 1983, when I got hired as a police officer, MDMA was unregulated and being used to therapeutically treat people in a very safe manner, and then we had 2 kids that died. Because of 2 kids, the DEA emergency scheduled MDMA, and I think about all the lives that have been lost because of the lack of research and based on retribution and punishment and trying to protect kids. That hasn't protected kids or our communities at all.
Okay. You can use the ecstasy vending machine if you donate 10 euros. You get a coin and then you can play with it. So that's a bit of fun. Perhaps it's a good idea to ask some people in the audience. You have been very patient so far. Are there any questions already here for someone in the panel? There's a question.
Simon Boorboom. Peter was the name, huh?
Yes, yes.
Yeah, you had very nice the questions you get and answers them. I need one. People say you cannot change anything in the law because of talking about convention. But I see Canada, many states in the States, Switzerland, they are changing. And nothing is happening internationally. So what about this argument, we cannot change it because of the international treaty?
Well, you're right, you can. I had all those questions listed up, but I had to limit my speech because of this gentleman. No, you
Zero
can.
tolerance.
Canada has changed, Germany is changing, Luxembourg is changing, Uruguay, Portugal. So it is possible if their interest, and that is the interpretation of the international treaties, if your interest nationally is higher than what is the international treaty is aiming for, then you can justify or adapt the international treaty. So it is a non-argument.
But Has just said we have to change all the treaties. So
Well,
what shall it be?
We don't want to change the treaty on chemical warfare, for instance. So, and the drug policy treaties are even older. So yes, we want to change the drug policy treaties in the end, but we need to practice with that first, as we see that penalty, for instance, for health reasons, for drug policy reasons, increase in Saudi Arabia and a lot of other countries in the world. So yes, we need to change the international treaties. This is difficult. You can have inter se in between treaties when national governments are like, hey, we're gonna change these laws, but you have to start locally in big cities where the problems really emerge in order to really change things.
I think this is an important role for the NGOs and Anne, obviously, with all the work that she's doing at the UN and the coalitions they've put together. But to your point, the United States has just ignored the treaties because of federalism in our country, and we don't care. Like California voted for cannabis regulation. We're moving into the psychedelic world, and it's hypocritical, yet you know, I'm really happy that we're pushing back and the sky hasn't fallen despite prohibitionists who are in the UN who want to challenge the United States on this. So that is one good thing that the United States has done, is push that envelope, and we're going to, I think, from a state-by-state solution, going to continue to be able to do it. But we as NGOs, because LEAP also participates at C&D, have to stand together, and we've seen tremendous progress, goodness, in the last 5 or 6 years, that is now calling for health-based public health centered on people who use drugs and not on an emphasis on enforcement. So we are making progress, but it's because of NGOs, not because of politicians.
So that's another level between the states and the local level. Okay. And what really struck me is that everybody's talking about... Oh, sorry, there's another question. First you. Yeah.
There's a microphone there for the people at home.
Now, specifically about the United States, I was wondering, because indeed the international treaties were originally initiated by the United States, and then the Netherlands was a willing cooperator in them, that the leadership of the United States has been dwindling fast in all of this. Does that create new opportunities? Because on the other side of the planet, of course, China and such, they kind of like these treaties now because they have some stuff to hit other countries over the head with. Do you see any opportunities with sort of like the American empire dwindling for other regions to step in?
Absolutely, and I'm going to go back to the NGOs and what occurred at C&D last year is you saw the United States government almost abdicate their position of power in some aspects, vote with countries which we traditionally wouldn't, with Russia and with other prohibitionists, and that's created a vacuum in leadership that Anne, to your credit, is your leadership in that NGO space has been really critical to filling that void, and that's allowing other countries that the United States has minimized. So I know that one of the things going on in the States right now is they're talking about going after Colombia again, despite all the progress Colombia has made. And so I think that there's more countries that are willing to stand up to the United States, that we're not looked on so much as people in power, and we shouldn't be. This is, treaties should be about consensus building and saving people's lives. And so again, it is investing in NGOs that are strategic and smart and know how to collaborate and work in that space is really critically important.
Okay.
Good evening, everybody. Kai Hollemans, strategic drug policy consultant. I was wondering, because also of the story of the man from the USA we heard before, you're advocating for a proactive approach instead of a reactive approach. But what we see is there's a lot of money going to prohibition and less money going to harm reduction and, healthcare. So if you advocate for a public health approach first, how could the police actively help to get the money better divided? Because if my memory serves me correctly, it's like from the hundreds of millions of dollars that goes to prohibition every year, only a very small percentage, maybe 2 or 3% of that same money goes to public health. And now I've even seen mainline getting less money in about a few years. They might not even exist anymore. And when you see the work they are doing with such a small amount of money compared to the work that the police does, and if I hear correctly, it doesn't have any effect at all. It even makes it worse. Then how could we balance the skills? That's my question.
Peter, do you want to take that on from your perspective, and then
I was hoping you would.
Okay, I'll take it on.
No,
but please go ahead.
When talking about budget, we just had our budget approved, but we are funded by governments. So what I have to do with, I'm only speaking of Belgian situation, I have to make my case and defend it in front of my mayors and federal government, and then they say, okay, you get the money that you want, but there is not, we are going to fight drugs with this kind of money, which is a police budget in Belgium at least is mainly personal staff budget. So 80%, 90% of my money goes to paying my officers. What they do during the day is decided in a security council, where there is a district attorney, the mayors, some specialists, and they say, according to data, what are the biggest problems occurring in the area, and then you have to invest on those topics. Now, the funny part with drugs is the more you do checks on the streets according to drugs, the bigger your problem gets. So what we don't do is really engaging our officers into let's look for people in the possession of drugs. That's not my priority, because if we would, then I would have my top priority would always be drugs. The nasty part is I have Tomorrowland also in my area. So in our accountability tables, I always distract Tomorrowland. That's a different report, because if I would use that, then but there is international media focusing on Tomorrowland. We have to do our check because every year people are dying and the international press is there. Before we open, the first question is, did people die already? So that is also always focusing on this drug. So it is a bit of a difference. A police budget is mainly staff budget, and what you do with the staff is according to what's happening on the field. But that's how it's working in Belgium. It is also a question of priorities on the national level, of course, because public health is competence of the regions, not federal government. But that's a Belgian situation. It's very complex. So it all depends on the ministries we are responsible for and the budget they get on the national level.
From the United States perspective, it becomes even more complicated. We have not just 50 states, we have the federal government, and then we have state and local municipalities that all govern very, very differently. So policing in Redondo Beach, which we had 110 officers, looks much different than it does for LAPD. But I think that the problem is in the United States, for a long time, people have blamed law enforcement for taking up too much of the budget, where we look at budgets as a moral document from a LEAP perspective, and that law enforcement has been siloed off from co-shared systems of care and safety that are more efficacious than policing. So in the United States, we're developing these systems of care around civilian enforcement, where we're now starting to do cost-benefit analysis or evaluation and outcomes. My organization in particular has done multiple contracts that police agencies are like, oh my gosh, we don't have to respond to a socioeconomic issue of substance use disorder or poverty or mental health. The problem is legislators. I just, you know, cops get blamed for a lot of the ails of society, but I'm talking about the United States in particular, is our legislators don't fund the appropriate system of care, and then they silo the cops off, and then they allow problems to become so chronic until community members, whether they're suffering from being a victim of violence or they're seeing people who are homeless or in poverty that are dying out in the street, and the only people that answer the phone in the United States is us in uniform. And so until legislators and policymakers across every level of government recognize that funding is critical and long-term funding is critical into public health systems, educational systems, and cops should not be first responders unless it's violence. We should be assessing who the best responder to a need from the community is. And that's what our model is. That's what we're working on, is we don't want to be siloed away from these other systems. Policing plays a role. People get hurt and harmed. Let's save our law enforcement resources for people who want to hurt people, not for people who are suffering from poverty, mental health, or substance use disorder.
Isn't there a elephant in the room? Alcohol. We're talking about decriminalization of drugs, but we're not talking about alcohol. Alcohol is the #1 problem in the Western world. Not all over the world, but in the Western world. We're not talking about this tonight? But we're talking about a health problem. We're talking about a health problem. Isn't it a health problem?
Hans, do you have any ideas on this? Or?
I don't think alcohol is the elephant in the room. I think alcohol is one of many drugs that human beings take to get rid of certain feelings. I think we should do something with alcohol. I sense that the lobby of alcohol is quite strong also. And I think we now, we saw the graph at Ruben's speech. You have the prohibition paradox. If you commercially push for alcohol, you will get problems. If you prohibit alcohol, we saw with prohibition, you will get problems as well with the bootleg. So you need to be somewhere in between. I think now for tobacco regulations, we have the age limit, we have the packaging descriptions, we have the prices. We can you have more control mechanisms with tobacco. That I think people smoke less and less in the country, but we still see people smoking, so it's not ideal. We need to wait, it costs time. And for alcohol, I think we should start to go in the same direction with maybe a bit stricter, the age limit of 18 we have now, which is already quite a big step for alcohol. It was 16 10 years ago, and now it's 18, and we already see change there. Maybe the prices we could change a little bit. The sale points, the points of sale for alcohol, we could maybe divert that a little bit, or better warnings on it, like how many cancer types are being caused by alcohol. Things like that are definitely some things that could change for the better to minimize the problem of commercially sold alcohol. So for me, it's not an elephant in the room. But on the other hand, the problems are bigger with the really prohibited drugs. That's what we sense.
So
these cause organized crime, and this is something. To this morning, we had the big.
You're comparing apples and pears.
No, this morning there was a big.
Purely the number of people that are suffering directly and indirectly from alcohol abuse is #1.
Yes.
In the Western world. So whether it is not the drug or for alcohol, it is the people. To keep alcohol out of this discussion is not right. I'm not saying we should propose opiates because opium is a lot better for your organs than alcohol. I'm not saying that. But we have to put it in perspective that our society is sick because of alcohol. And it is legal. This is wrong.
Well, I think we have to...
I'd like to answer that from my perspective because I come from a family of alcoholics. My brother died from a polydrug overdose. I absolutely get what you're saying, but what we do know is that there's enough laws, whether it's in Amsterdam or in Belgium or in other countries or in the United States, that from a criminal perspective, if you're intoxicated and you're drunk and you hurt someone, we have enough laws on the books to hold someone accountable. But there are not enough systems in place to treat or have people be able to access treatment on demand. And I talk about alcohol all the time because I talk about all drugs. We are all drug users. There's not a person in this room that does not use drugs. And all of us need to understand, to your point, it is the behavior. But how are we going to treat the behavior? My emphasis should be based on the sanctity of life and public health. But if you get in a car and drive and kill someone, I'm going to hold you accountable through a prosecutor and a criminal justice system. But prohibiting alcohol now or nicotine or coffee is not going to cure the problem. We have to have systems of care in place to make people's lives better. So no one is ignoring the alcohol question. It's all, when I talk about regulating all drugs, it's minimizing the risk of legal drugs to a public health and a public safety perspective and elevating those other drugs so we have control and not crooks and criminals.
There is another question, I believe.
Yeah, no, I would like to add something. I think alcohol is the example. We should learn from alcohol. The prohibition of alcohol was a disaster. It's the situation you are describing now. Shootouts, it's legalized. We have no shootouts between Budweiser and Heineken. When I go weekly to buy my liter of Genever, I know it's good quality. I pay my tax. I trust the man who is selling it to me. So I think alcohol is just how it should be. Yes, it's harmful. I have been working in addiction world. I have lost more patients on alcohol than on opiates. But that's a health problem. Therefore, we have doctors, and cops should be away from it.
Okay, very well. We have a little workout for Ruben. He has to go all the way to.
Thank you. My name is Ansela Voets from Mainline. I have a question that is actually a continuation of what you said on the legislators that need to change. My question is, how do we make them change? Because we see in a lot of countries, in the US and in the Netherlands and in many other countries, we see legislators becoming less and less interested in human beings and human rights and values that should be normal, I think. So how do we tell those legislators that they should actually invest in people and invest in care systems?
It's such a, well, if I had that answer, I'd be a bazillionaire right now, right? Let's just be honest, right? Is, for me, how I affect change is that I bring people with stories. I can talk policy all day long, but I also have a story like Peter does, right? And so every single one of us here has probably been impacted in some way by drug prohibition or alcoholism, and it's those stories that can change minds. And it's also getting grassroots community members to vote people out. Mm-hmm. And I think that's the hard part is in America. I'm an immigrant. I was born in Mexico City, so I hold kind of these very dualities and these interesting perspectives about these issues. Is that in America, we actually have lots of police chiefs, lots of prosecutors, judges, legislators behind closed doors who will absolutely agree with this and say the drug war and prohibition is an absolute abject failure. But people are afraid, and it's getting worse now across all our countries. So it's not one coalition, it's coalitions that are connected globally. And I think this is the importance of forums like this, because the problems we have in America are similar but different across all our countries. And what connects us is those human stories that change people's minds. I swore that when my brother died from a polydrug overdose that my mom was so ashamed because of our Mexican culture to tell people that, to tell our family that he had died from a drug overdose because he also suffered from being bipolar. And he had been a person in recovery for 20 years and had been justice impacted. And when he lost his job and his health care and access to psychotropic meds and his therapist, his life fell apart. And he died because of the system. And my mother was ashamed. And so I do this work so nobody needs to be ashamed, because we're all connected in this fashion. It's not $1 bazillion, but, you know, story.
I'm Attila from the Green Revolution Foundation, and my question is that would you think that removing the profit motive from producing, handling, and selling drugs would help the situation, and would you support people, NGOs who want to sell non-profit cannabis, for example, or non-profit cocaine, which is created transparently and sustainably without harm?
For whom is this question?
For all of you.
For all of you, okay. Perhaps has the city of Amsterdam some ideas about this, or is it too early?
No, not at all. We've been thinking about this question a lot, and I think it's really not, well, even if it was about the profit, I think it's very important to use this profit for the right causes. And for example, it could be used for or to support the health services, or support the harm reduction services that are now being, not funded. So even if we were to sell like regulated MDMA, government-made drugs, I think with this profit we could make lots of difference, especially within the harm reduction field.
So, but it's not just, okay. It's not just handing it over to commercial companies then, because we have seen that with tobacco, with alcohol, with fentanyl, and that's...
And I think about learning lessons. This gentleman said that we've learned lessons from the alcohol market. I think we've also learned lessons from liberalizing the gambling markets. That's absolutely not how we would do it. Strict regulating instead of letting the liberal market do its thing.
Can I add, or am I talking too much?
Well, first the gentleman next to... Oh, there's a gentleman right there. Who is first?
I just have a question. Hi, my name is Luke. I organize psychedelic retreats, even for cops. The control that you mentioned over drug markets, it's really the enforcement of the war. Do you ever see it declining when there's a policy change? And another example is we have truffles. They are legal. You know, there's no drama in the streets. You know, so there's so much controversy about it everywhere in the world. But in many ways, we are living an example of safe psychedelics in society. How do you see it possible that control or this war will ever go down?
I'll start on that because you bring up psychedelics, which is one of the big projects that I'm working on right now. And it's interesting to your point about ensuring that money that comes out of the industry goes back to fund projects. In Texas in particular, this Ibogaine research, the state of Texas actually is going to retain the intellectual property from all the money in the research. But if they do that and they make a profit, all that profit is going to be going back into veteran programs relative to veteran needs. And so I think from a policy perspective, we have to demand that our legislators return the investment back to solve problems, whether it's alcohol or, you know, tobacco or something else. But from a personal perspective and from the projects that I'm working on around the issue of psychedelics, psychedelics is going to have this very interesting place, I think, to change hearts and minds from law enforcement. And so I'm hoping to do some fundraising around a particular project that is actually going to do public polling, designated strictly for law enforcement on trying to figure out what their stance is, and then developing public education campaigns and then pilot projects. And so law enforcement understands that psychedelics, MDMA, because the underground market for first responders in the United States is huge, both for retired and active duty that are being sent in and out of our country to unlikely places like Texas. We have one of our speakers who is the first active duty police lieutenant who was granted his religious exemption by his police chief, no less, and his city manager to practice his religion and his spirituality through the use of psychedelics. Psychedelics has this interesting place to blow open the drug war in some interesting ways, and we're working towards sussing out what that's going to mean. In the United States, in Arizona, they have a trigger bill that when MDMA becomes legal, and it's going to, that it can be used by first responders to treat workman's comp. And so it's the work that is going on in that realm is completely different than rest of the drug markets right now.
But they come to the same dealer, and they are also fitted to deal with the mental health of
There's all sorts of really positive things. Elimination of spillover violence, officer wellness, lessen suicide, cure alcoholism. You want to cure alcoholism? Let's just, then psychedelics is a good way of doing it.
We have another question in the back.
So at next Tomorrowland, the dealers, they will still be arrested. But if we do not agree anymore with the drug laws to arrest them, then what moral basis still left to arrest those drug dealers? So we are now in between, well, it's complicated in between. So if the laws have to be changed, you're still working according to laws you do not agree with. Isn't that a problem?
Well, like I said, I'm an active duty, and I don't decide policy. I can only try to convince my policymakers to change the policy. But once I'm in duty, I have to do what I have to do. Dealers are arrested, but Belgium is a prohibitionist country. But on the field, on the low level, we try to be pragmatic. So we have district attorneys on the field as well, and they decide whether somebody has possession for personal use or a dealer. And they're quite liberal in that. So if you are checked as a consumer only, then you won't have a record, you won't have you have to pay a small amount of money, and then you have to leave the festival, but there will be no prosecution. Once you are a dealer, and then the level is pretty high, so it's pretty clear that you are there for dealing. Then you have a direct subpoena, and you know when to face the judges, which is in the 22nd of October, my birthday. They have specific thematic sessions for the dealers on Tomorrowland. But there again, we could catalog everybody with 7 MDMA pills as a dealer, which we don't. So there is really on the case level with the district attorney on our side to decide whether it's for personal use or not. It's a pragmatic way to deal with the rules, but we cannot say. I did say it behind closed doors. You can say everything to politicians, but Tomorrowland, every politician comes. The prime minister, every minister comes to Tomorrowland. In behind closed doors, I suggested to the Minister of Public Health, why can't Tomorrowland sell their own ecstasy, cocaine, and ketamine? Because these are the 3 products that are mainly used on the festival, besides some other. If they would sell their own drugs, I wouldn't be chasing dealers under the circumstances that they are licensed and blah, blah, blah. But unfortunately, our law does not allow that yet. But I said that's to the ministers, and behind closed doors, they say, maybe that's not such a bad idea. But once you put them in before the cameras.
So suppose you're a police officer and you don't want to do this work anymore. Can you say, in Dutch, gewetensbezwaar?
No. It's, if you wear the uniform, you have an oath, you swear obedience to Constitution, to the laws and so forth. If every police officer start to say, I'm going to enforce this law, but with this law I have some mental issues, I think you should look for another job. There, besides drugs, I have other legislation that I'm on a personal level, I think, what the hell is this? With drugs, I have a personal connection, but there are many other laws. Just a citizen, I think I would change the policy. But then you're playing in a democratic system, or elected people are making the laws. If police officers are going to decide what law they are going to enforce and what doesn't, what not, we are in a very dangerous state, I think.
And
There's one. Oh, sorry.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
We have to work towards the one last question.
I actually have 2 questions.
Oh,
but the first one is regarding like legalizing drugs. Like, what kind of KPIs would you implement? For example, you were talking in the beginning about how do you say it? Like the amount of people that have been using drugs in 2015 compared to 2023, and you said like probably the person in charge of that would be fired by then. But if you're legalizing drugs, you could say that potentially the drug usage is going up. And secondly, would you also be selling drugs that are like, I don't know for sure, but I think, for example, fentanyl, if you use it once, you get addicted like physically, immediately. Would you be selling those drugs as well in certain shops? Because of course that would have...
Did you ever have surgery?
No.
Well, if you had surgery, you probably would be sedated with fentanyl. So in that logic, then everybody who had surgery would be chasing heroin or fentanyl on the streets. So I think addiction is a triangle between product, person, and context. I believe in that. So I don't think the product itself will make you an addicted person immediately. I think it's the context, the reasons why you're using it and so forth. That's another discussion. But I don't think you'll get addicted that easily. And the first question, well, like I said, I think you can expect an increase of the use of some drugs, because for decades you cannot use this. The moment it is legally regulated, I might be curious, what does effect would that have on me? But I don't think that once I have tried it, that I would be compulsory drawn to the product, because if you follow that logic, then we would all buy liquor in the supermarket. So it's a difficult question, but even legalizing and accepting that there is an increase in use, then the benefits of legal regulation outweigh by far the negative consequences of an increase of use of drugs.
Thank you. I think we have to put an end to it, because we also have Lex Melling for our wrap-up. And he's already sweating. Thank you very much for your effort. Lex Mellings is also a veteran with the police. He worked for almost 30 years with the Utrecht police force, and he was also a director of the Dutch Police Academy and an expert on safety and public health, public space. And I give the wrap up to you.
Almost 50 years ago, I started as a police officer in the Netherlands. I was chief of police in the city of Utrecht, and that was a different city than a lot of others in the Netherlands, because of a chief of police who was trying to get more reason to act. Later, I became director of the Police Academy of the Netherlands, and in that period, more than 20 years ago, there was a minister, Ella Vogelaar. Ella Vogelaar was a minister of housing and integration and diversity, and she acted as a minister who tried to get new ideas about creating safer communities. There were 40 cities, not cities, areas in cities, problem areas, in which she started a program which led to a new approach creating safer communities, working together, housing, health, sports, education. Well, all those things we know that create an environment in which drugs might be less important, she worked on. Later, I decided to, I was responsible for this work, and for me it was very logic to go on with that, but not within the police, but out of police. The last 15 years, I'm a social architect. I help mayors creating safe communities. And the mayor of Rotterdam, when he became mayor in Rotterdam, Ivo Opstelten, he decided that when he would have more influence in creating Rotterdam as a safer city, that there had to become new servants, new people on a very high level who were able, he called them city marines, a sort of a fake name actually, but acting with power, with a direct actions from the mayor, and that led to some solutions in which the police was less important than before. It was the police who was acting as always, but the other parties, they create a new perspective. Well, I heard this evening, it was very interesting and kind of heartbreaking, because what's the solution? We heard a lot of ideas, but how to create a situation in which we together have actions which we are proud on, and with a lot of marketing is needed, and publicity is needed. Those are the actors in our society who changes. And we have to cooperate with that. That's an invitation to all of you and for me too. So thank you very much for your attention here and the wise words I heard. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Well, that's the end of exactly at 30 minutes past 9. Next door is the elephant next to the room, our hard drug alcohol, if you want to continue our discussion. And I really would like to thank our panel and our speakers, and we have a small attention, but we'll present it to you afterwards. Thank you very much for your attention.